The instant you explain yourself, you surrender the room. Not because you're wrong, but because you accepted a trial that never existed. An accusation doesn't need facts to win. It needs your reaction. And the moment you rush to clarify, to justify, to be understood, you hand power to the person attacking you. But there is a darker move, one that freezes manipulators, one that flips the hierarchy without raising your voice. Silence, not weakness. Control. The moment an accusation hits you, something ancient wakes up inside your nervous system. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts race. Not because the accusation is true, but because your body has been trained to fear judgment. Long before logic steps in, biology takes over. Cortisol surges, the mind scrambles for safety. And safety, you were taught, comes from explaining. This reflex did not come from nowhere. It was installed early, when you were small and authority loomed large. Explanation was survival. You learned that if you could just say the right words, show the right reasons, prove the right intent, punishment might be avoided. So you learned to plead your case. You learned to narrate your innocence. You learned that being good meant being understood. But here's the quiet disaster. You grew up, and the world changed. But that program never shut off. Now every raised eyebrow feels like a courtroom. Every challenge feels like a trial. Your boss becomes a judge. Your partner becomes a prosecutor. A stranger's comment becomes a verdict waiting to be delivered. And without realizing it, you step into the role of the defendant over and over again. The instant you defend yourself, you are not correcting facts. You are conceding authority. You are saying, you have the right to evaluate me. You have the right to decide who I am. And once that frame is accepted, you are already beneath them, no matter how strong your argument sounds. This is the illusion. Machiavelli understood with brutal clarity. Power is not owned by the person with the best explanation. Power belongs to the person who controls the frame. Whoever defines the situation controls the outcome, and defense is submission to someone else's definition of reality. Notice how rarely explanations actually work. Think of the last time you carefully laid out context, reasons, screenshots, time. Did the other person suddenly relax and say they were wrong? Or did they move the goalpost, twist your words, or escalate? That is because the attack was never about truth. It was about leverage. They were testing whether you could be pulled. Most people fail that test instantly. They live as emotional marionettes, jerking to every accusation, every misunderstanding, every implied judgment. Someone frowns. They apologize. Someone hints. They clarify. Someone attacks. They over-explain. Life becomes a constant performance for approval, a slow erosion of inner authority. But there is another way to stand in the world, a way that does not depend on winning arguments or being correctly perceived. It begins with a simple realization that feels almost dangerous the first time you touch it. The courtroom does not exist. There is no judge. There is no jury. There is only another human projecting their inner chaos outward and hoping you will carry it for them. When you stop treating other people like judges, accusations lose their weight. They stop sounding like sentences and start sounding like opinions. And opinions are just noise unless you kneel before them. This is where non-defense begins, not as a tactic, but as a shift in identity. You are no longer a child seeking safety through approval. You are a sovereign individual who does not require permission to exist as you are. That internal shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because the person who does not rush to defend cannot be controlled by accusation. And that is when silence stops being empty. It becomes loaded. Now imagine the moment itself. Someone looks at you and says, "You're being selfish," or careless, or disrespectful. The old reflex is ready to leap forward, armed with explanations, receipts, emotional justifications. You can almost feel the words lining up behind your teeth, desperate to escape. This is the exact moment where power is decided. Instead of speaking, you do nothing. You hold their gaze. Your face stays neutral. Your body stays relaxed. You let the silence stretch. 3 seconds. 4. 5. That silence is not empty. It is a psychological vacuum. Humans are deeply uncomfortable with unresolved tension. Silence in conflict feels like a rupture, like something has gone wrong in the social script. And when you refuse to fill that gap, the other person's mind begins to panic. They expected resistance. They expected defense. They expected you to play your part. When you don't, they start playing both roles. They begin to talk again, softer this time, or louder, or more frantic. They clarify their own accusation. They walk it back. They over-explain. Without realizing it, they step into the position you've just abandoned. They become the one justifying, the one seeking validation. The power has already flipped, and you still haven't decided a word. This is why silence terrifies manipulators. Manipulation requires engagement. It needs friction. It needs you to push back so they can push harder. Silence offers nothing to grab onto. You cannot punch fog. You cannot wrestle smoke. The attack passes straight through you and leaves the attacker off balance. Inside, your ego is screaming. Say something clever. Defend your honor. Prove you're not weak. That voice is not wisdom. It is conditioning. It is the child who learned that silence meant danger. You have to leash that instinct and let it burn itself out. Machiavelli understood something most people never grasp. The most powerful person in the room is the one who cannot be read. The moment you defend yourself, you reveal what matters to you. You expose your wounds. You show them exactly where to press next time. Say you shout, "I'm not stupid." Now they know intelligence is your insecurity. Say you insist, "I'm a good person." Now they know morality is your weak spot. Defense is a confession disguised as strength. Silence confesses nothing. It is a dark mirror, and when someone looks into it, all they see is themselves, their aggression, their insecurity, their need to dominate. That reflection makes people deeply uncomfortable. They start to feel judged without you ever judging them. Sometimes, silence alone is enough. Other times, words are required, but never defensive words. When you speak, you do not push against the attack. You pull it. You redirect it. You use the aikido of conversation. This is where agreement becomes a weapon. If someone accuses you of something exaggerated or absurd, defending yourself treats the accusation as serious. It validates it. Instead, you agree and amplify. You take their statement and stretch it until it collapses under its own weight. They say you're obsessed with money. You say, completely calm, "Absolutely. I bathe in gold like a cartoon villain." It's very therapeutic. No anger, no sarcasm, just amused distance. In that moment, you refuse the emotional frame of the attack. You show that the topic does not touch you. You turn their attempt to wound into something harmless, even ridiculous. The knife they brought to stab you becomes a toy in your hand. This attitude is called amused mastery. It is the posture of someone who knows they are safe, like an adult watching a child throw a tantrum. You don't argue with the child. You don't take the screaming personally. You observe it. That observation alone establishes hierarchy. People are instinctively drawn to those who are unreactive under pressure, not because they are cold, but because they are whole. A person who knows who they are does not rush to correct every misunderstanding. They let false narratives starve from lack of attention. If someone calls you stingy and you know you are generous, you laugh. If someone calls you arrogant and you know your limits, you smile. Defense only appears when doubt already lives inside you. And that realization points to something deeper, something uncomfortable, something essential. Every confrontation hides a second conversation beneath the first. On the surface, words are exchanged. Accusations, questions, labels. Underneath, something else is happening. Roles are being assigned. One person becomes the judge. The other becomes the defendant. And the one answering questions is always losing ground. Why did you do that? What were you thinking? Who do you think you are? The moment you answer, you accept the role. You validate the structure. You kneel inside an invisible courtroom and argue for your worth. The most dangerous move is not to argue better. It is to refuse the trial entirely. You do this by shifting the spotlight. When someone interrogates you, instead of explaining yourself, you become curious about them. Not hostile, not defensive. Curious. You answer questions with questions that expose the emotional engine driving the attack. Why does this bother you so much? What about this feels threatening to you? What reaction are you hoping to get from me right now? Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about your behavior. It is about their reaction. You are no longer on your back foot. You are observing, analyzing, calm. This infuriates people who rely on control through provocation. They want you scrambled. Instead, you are still. There is another variation of this power that feels counterintuitive at first. Agreement. Not agreement as surrender, but agreement as absorption. When someone hurls criticism at you, they are throwing energy. Most people throw it back. That creates a fight. Instead, you let it pass through you. You say, "You're right," and you stop talking. No explanation. No justification. Just stillness. This collapses momentum. They expected resistance. They expected denial. When none comes, their anger has nowhere to land. The force dissipates, but there is a crucial distinction here. You agree with facts, not identities. You can admit an action without accepting a character assassination. You mess this up. You say, "Yes, I did. I'll fix it." You do not address the insult attached to it. You do not argue about who you are. Only insecure people cling to a flawless self-image. Secure people correct mistakes without drama. That calm ownership signals real authority. All of these techniques fail if they are only performances. Words are secondary. The real work is internal. You have to understand why accusations hook you in the first place. They hurt because they touch a wound you already carry. If someone calls you something you know is false, you feel nothing. If someone calls you something you secretly fear, you react. That reaction is the tell. The ultimate non-defense is self-knowledge. When you have already faced your own flaws, no one can weaponize them against you. When you accept that you can be selfish at times, being called selfish loses its sting. When you accept that you can fail, being called a failure sounds hollow. You cannot shame someone who has already integrated their shadow. This is what it means to be untouchable. Not invincible. Not perfect. Whole. You stop being a fortress that must constantly be guarded. You become something fluid. Transparent. Arrows pass through. Accusations dissolve. For the next stretch of your life, try a simple discipline. When you are accused, state facts only. No reasons. No context. When you are misunderstood, let the misunderstanding exist. When you feel the urge to explain, pause and feel it burn. That discomfort is the old conditioning dying. Watch how people respond when you stop feeding their projections. Watch confusion turn into respect. Watch respect turn into magnetism. Because nothing signals certainty more clearly than a person who does not need to justify their existence. Silence is not emptiness. It is sovereignty.